Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Mind and Body Podcast. I am super pumped about this episode because I have my friend Ryan here. Ryan is a strength training coach. He trains at the same gym. I'm often really angry at him actually because I will do a video and I'm doing deadlifts and I'm lifting pretty heavy. I'm hitting like 500 pounds a little bit for a couple reps, like feeling good about myself. Then the next day, Ryan does his video and he's like throwing around 500, just warming up. Maybe not, maybe that's a
Oh.
little exaggerated, but dude, I am so glad to talk to you because I know we have a lot of people who tune into this channel that are interested in strength training. And me just observing you in the gym, I'm like, this guy knows what he's doing. You stick by the stuff. You're not trying to do anything super crazy or
Mhm.
fancy. You stick with those fundamentals and you just grind out, and I love it. So thank you for joining this discussion. Thanks for jumping on the channel, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Love to be here. My first podcast, so I'm super
Yeah,
excited
you
to
were
be a
telling me
part
that.
of
I was
it.
actually kind of shocked, actually, but I'm glad this is your first podcast. This will be kind of fun to dive in.
Yeah.
So here's my first question for you. What got you into strength training?
Okay, so my whole fitness background started prior to my entry in the military. So I served 3 years in the U.S. Army, and going into that, had no prior fitness experience. I never played sports in school, was never athletic or did anything like that. Now, in the army, all you do is run. And then when I was in, all we did was push ups and sit ups, basically. Um, so I started running all the time, got really good at running, and I got really skinny. Joined the military, did the thing for 3 years. While I was in, I realized that I was super weak in comparison to a lot of my teammates. So I was a little bit of a smaller guy. I'm 5'9", and I weighed in somewhere around 150 pounds when I was in the army. Um, so anytime we had to do a ruck march, put on some weight on our backs and go walk, or anytime that involved carrying things with your hands like ammo or whatever, I just would underperform. Um, Also, I developed kind of like a chronic low back pain issue being in the military just from doing all the stuff. When I left the Army in 2018, came back home to North Carolina. Um, Honestly, I was just tired of being weak and frail. And I said, something's got to change here. And my buddies had invited me to go to the gym a bunch. I never did because I was embarrassed that I didn't know how to do any of the things. And honestly, I should have just gone and let them teach me. But that's a barrier that I think a lot of people have is just the upfront intimidation factor. I definitely had that. Um, so coming home to the States, realized I had low back issues. I need to get stronger. So I started looking up YouTube videos on how to lift, got a gym membership, started going to this gym, one of the local gyms here in the area. Um, Began learning how to deadlift literally from YouTube, just from other people, watching other people in the gym, talking to them and asking them, hey, can you watch me, make sure I'm doing this right? Um, and over the years of focusing on those big movements, like the deadlift, the squat, and the bench, I started to get strong pretty quickly. There's newbie gains, of course, but um, started putting on some actual muscle mass. And then I realized that my chronic low back pain started to fade away and eventually completely went away. Um, and I was like, man, if strength training can do this for me, um, like what can it do for other people? I want to help other people with these issues. I realized that like exercise can be a form of medicine.
Mm.
I was like, man, I need to teach other people how to do this because I had this issue. That's really what got me started in strength training. So really like 2018, literally first started going to the gym and lifting up until now. So it's been 7 years or so.
Wow, that's impressive. Just like with where you came from and where you're at now, you know, it's amazing
For
that
sure.
compounding effect that can take place, just years of doing the thing. And
Yeah.
shout out to YouTube. Like a lot of people dog on YouTube videos, but there's so much good things that you can learn. And then sure, there's obviously
Oh
a
yeah.
bad side, right? But shout out to that. Also, what I find interesting is you had lower back pain and you
Mm,
said, I got to fix this. I'm going to do deadlifts, which there's a lot of people like, deadlifts or, you shouldn't do them if you have this or that. And I guess it depends on what kind of back pain that you're experiencing. But
Sure.
maybe like dive into that a little bit as a, expert in strength training. What's your thoughts if somebody says, "Man, I'm kind of I don't know if I want to do deadlifts because of this." What would you give pushback? What's your thoughts there?
Absolutely. I always give pushback on that because of my personal experience, but it makes total sense for people to be wary of lifting a heavy thing off of the floor because they think they're going to hurt their back. Um, I mean, for years, people have been told to lift with your legs, not with your back. Um, I feel like that's part of the problem when you never expose muscle to a stressor or your back to a stressor in those spinal erectors, they never get strong and they just weaken, which then in turn increases your chance for injury. So
Mm,
I try to explain that to people when I hear that first. Um, when I teach a deadlift to my clients that haven't deadlifted before, or if I'm coaching, let's say a CrossFit class and I'm teaching deadlift to a whole bunch of people that have never done this before, um, I usually say that the deadlift can be the best exercise for you, can also be potentially the worst exercise for you if you do it incorrectly. It's one of those things where form matters a lot and gradual adaptation matters a lot. You can't just jump into a deadlift and throw in two plates on each side, 225 pounds, and expect to lift it, at least not well for most people. So I always say, hey, take it from me as someone, I know this is just anecdotal, but even the latest research shows this as well. In physiotherapy offices, the efficacy of using deadlifts to treat low back pain is totally there. It's backed by science. Um,
mhm.
and I mean, you can't argue with science. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I like that. And, it's both, like, on the experiential level and the scientific level. As a
mhm,
coach, you're experience this not only personally, but with people, but research that's doing this with studies, actively checking all the data points. It's like, "Hey, the evidence suggests that this is actually a good thing." I have a couple of, like, personal, I'm sorry, physical therapist friends that
mhm,
I consult with often,
mhm,
and, it's interesting to me that pretty much if you have like, in my shoulder, like has some pain, maybe lack some mobility, they typically kind of run towards the pain. I mean, depending on what it is a lot of times it's like, we're going to try
yeah,
to push your range of motion as hard as, not hard, but as far as we can possible, obviously without causing more injury. But then the next week you come back, they're going to try to advance that to where it's back to normal, but it's trying to get blood into that area so that it accelerates the healing process. And so it's not, they don't run away. Oh, that hurts. Let's not move it, which a lot of people tend to think like, oh, I have like an injury. I should probably, you know, just not move it. But that could be one of the worst things that you could do. And of course,
right,
if you have a
yeah,
pain, suggest going to a professional on that. But I do think it is interesting how they're actually kind of having you move towards it, towards the pain
mhm,
and moving it and trying to get blood into the air to facilitate that. So I've seen a lot of physical therapists will start with like even like a lightweight or like a bar or something like that and doing kind of like regular deadlifts and even some deficiency, depending on the type of back pain. Um, and feel free to, if you have any like additional protocols that you use or any specificity there. But I just find it interesting. Like if somebody says, man, I have lower back pain, I'm thinking, let's find ways to actually work your back and as in a safe way through a good range of motion so
right,
that you actually get strong there. You can't expect to get strong there by avoiding the area. You need to actually
certainly.
like focus on it. Any thoughts there on protocols that you would utilize for somebody in that spot?
Sure. Barring severe injuries like multiple herniated disc or something like that, where you literally can't do that motion, I feel like you can boil down the deadlift into a fundamental pattern, which is a hinge pattern. Um, so that being said, you don't necessarily have to do a deadlift exercise. You can totally strengthen those spinal erectors and glute and hamstring muscles with something like Roman chair extensions, some form of good morning variation. And there's always a way to scale that hinge pattern down all the way to something where anyone can do. There's always a beginner, then all the way up to an intermediate and advanced option, um, which I've had to do with some people sometimes, scaling down a movement pattern to make it accessible. So I feel like there's always a way to train movement patterns. It doesn't have to be a particular exercise. If that makes
Would you
sense.
say it's like one of the fundamental for like, obviously, like when you're doing training for hypertrophy, you're
Hmm.
thinking the muscle itself. Like if I'm using squats per se for training, uh, I might say I'm using squats to train quads. It might hit other muscle groups, but I'm really trying to focus on quads. Whereas like in strength training, it's not necessarily specified by muscle group as much as like I'm training the squat. That's the movement itself that I'm really
Right,
trying to train. Yes,
right.
and it could result in stronger, even bigger quads or glutes. It could depending on how you do it. Is that how you think about it predominantly, like
Hmm.
movement centric as opposed to like specific?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, the way I approach training with my clients, and I tell this to them up front before they even sign on with me. Say, hey, you may have your individual goals, whether that's hypertrophy or whatever body goal they may have. The core essence of my training is going to be very holistic, strength based. So we're going to cover every single fundamental human movement pattern. I think the common agreed patterns are an overhead push, an overhead pull, horizontal push, horizontal pull, some type of hip hinge, and then some type of squat. And that generally covers all your bases. Um, that is what I base my training around. And then if the client has some sort of particular hypertrophy goal, then absolutely we'll include that in.
that's
But
cool.
we're always going to focus on the core things to make you a more robust individual overall, more functional individual.
So variations of push, variations of pull, then you have
Hmm.
hinge, and you have like a squat
Hmm.
variation or something. Do you include in those fundamentals like core and like gait training, or is that kind of like, hey, you're pretty much checking the boxes for core with these heavy lifts? How do you think about that?
Yeah, certainly you can't just do those lifts and train the entire core. And so usually I'll add in some type of ab isolation movement, whether that be carries or some type of crunch movement using a machine or weights or what have you, usually at the end of their session.
Okay,
That's
got
how
it.
we
Do you
include
put
that.
that in your mind? Is that kind of like in that like um, accessory, maybe some hypertrophy
That's
spot?
more of a accessory isolation type movement deal for me.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so I'm gonna dive into some more of those details. I could definitely wanna just do this, but I wanted to get a little bit more of, like, you and your wife both
Hmm.
run a coaching business together, and I was telling you beforehand, I absolutely love it because you're an expert on the strength training side, and your wife is, I don't know if you would call her a nutritionalist. Would you call her that? Or she's a nutritional coach? I know the
Hmm.
specificity of terms sometimes people get a little tripped up over, but I know that she does coaching and nutrition. She recently did a post that I was fascinated with that related nutrition to mental health.
Hmm.
And I'll just have to tell you this now. I want to try to get her on if I can
Oh
sometime in the
yeah, she'd love to.
future because I feel like that is a really missing point. Like, I
Hmm.
think people understand there's a correlation between your, like, your brain health and gut health. There's, like, this
Hmm.
correlation, but really diving into specificity on that is, it's kinda generalized, like, "Oh, hey, what you put in your gut can affect your brain health." Also, the way that you think and process things can affect your gut health, they're sending signals both ways, but to what level can we actually impact that is
Hmm.
a fascinating study. But you guys are working together, like, you're just like this, like, power couple, man, just working it out. I just love seeing it.
Thanks.
Where did you guys meet?
So we met back in youth group, um, back in high school. We were both in high school. We both attended the same big church in our area, both involved with the youth there. We were actually doing fine arts as part of our denominational organization. What it is basically they take the youth, um, and it's an arts program, and the kids get to compete in that. And I was drumming, and she was doing sermon prep and a couple other things. And we ended up crossing paths, and that's how we met. So totally not related to fitness or nutrition at all. We both actually kind of started our fitness and nutrition journeys at the same time, and we both grew into that together.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool. That's
and
really cool.
so, yeah, we were doing completely different things outside of wellness and fitness before we both started to kind of do the same thing
Mm.
around 2019.
Do you still
So
jam out?
I do, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. I play a little acoustic guitar. Um, I'm really a drummer at heart. So
Okay.
I learned the drums middle school and high school, and then played on the worship team. Did drumline in high school, and then can't really play drum sets in our houses and apartments because they're too loud. So
Oh, yes.
I gave up the drums and picked up guitar, and again from YouTube learned how to play it. And
Look at you go, man.
yeah,
We're gonna keep
YouTube
giving
is
shout out
awesome.
to YouTube here. That's great.
Yeah.
My wife and I both have a music background. My wife majored in music, so she's
Oh,
like
awesome.
her whole family is like whether it's singing or playing instruments, they're just incredible. I minored in music, but I'm just like I'm like I'm annoying. I think I have enough skill, but I'm not like natural skill is not as much there. Like I actually have more like voice pedagogy background,
All
but
right.
my wife can like when it comes to singing, just very natural voice. It's just
Yeah.
it was like
Yeah.
very beautiful. But I I was thinking about you playing the drum. I learned how to play the cajon. Do you know what a cajon is?
Oh yeah. Love
And
it. Love a cajon.
I probably would annoy you, Ryan, because like with my cajon, but I was like, this is fun. I actually really enjoy the cajon. It's like really simple. But I tried a little bit of drums, but I probably what I missed? Should have watched the YouTube video. That's it.
Yeah, you
That's
gotta
it.
learn
I'm
all
gonna
the
look for your
tutorials.
channel on drum playing. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But that's really neat. And so you guys both started journeying on the nutritional aspect together. When did you become a trainer? Did you guys become trainers at the same time?
Not quite the same time. So to make a long story short, what had happened was with the church thing, we ended up working with our church organization and went overseas, lived overseas, doing some missions work for a little bit. While we were overseas, uh, Grace basically got diagnosed with a uh, autoimmune disease, and that kind of sparked her interest into learning. Okay, there's something more to this. It's more about not treating the symptom, but treating what's causing these issues. And
Mm.
she learned that she could treat a lot of this by using nutrition. So she went on to pursue her master's degree in nutrition, um, kind of our last few months there overseas. At the same time, I knew that we were going to be coming back home to North Carolina, and I needed a job. I had already been lifting for a few years by this point, and I had decided, okay, I'll just go ahead and get my personal trainer certification, and then when we get back home, I'll look for a training job. And so that's kind of how it aligned together there. Um,
So when you guys met in high school, right? It was high
mhm,
school. Um, y- were you guys planning on kind of a ministry life? Like that was like
mhm,
um the plan, and then this kind of interrupted that that mission, at least on the mission field type of thing. So wow, so
yeah,
you guys had to kind of pivot. It was like a pivotal moment, like, oh, hey, what
yeah,
can we do to make money, survive? And so you just kind of leaned into like, hey, I've already developed this skill set. Is that kind of how
right.
that played out?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so it
Basically,
kind
exactly
of
what you said.
emerged out of a something you enjoy doing, but out of a kind of a hey, here's a pain point that we're trying to resolve. And it's
Hmm.
so interesting how like life moves you in certain directions, and how you're like, hey, I wouldn't like I didn't imagine this when I was younger that I'd be in this spot, but kind of
Oh
I'm
yeah.
glad I'm here. It's kind of like you could see how it um, depending on how you view the world, it's kind of like, hey, I could see the purpose behind how we got to the spot. And I think it makes you very empathetic towards helping people. Like you can see people, I don't know if you can relate with this, I'm sure you can, but when you coach people in strength, you're doing more than just
Mm.
coaching them how to do lifts. You're actually
Oh
helping them
yeah.
become like a more confident person, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There
Yeah.
I love it, man. I just love it when I'm able to see not just someone get stronger or
Hmm.
lose weight or whatever their goal may be, but for them to see, hey, I'm stacking these wins.
Hmm.
Like, I didn't think I'd be able to lift this weight. I didn't think I'd actually be able to lose the weight and actually know how to lose it for good. I didn't think, and it's like they're stacking this proof up, and they're able to say, you know what, I wonder how this can bleed into other areas of my life. It's just
Absolutely.
a
Yeah.
beautiful thing,
Yeah.
and the getting in shape can be the catalyst for someone's whole life being turned around.
It definitely can. Yeah. We kind of realize that, you have physical health, mental health, also spiritual health. Um, and those three things really are all intertwined more than most people think. Um, and you really need to get all of them in line. And I feel like a lot of people in the line of work that we were in, perhaps didn't view the physical health thing as much as they should have. And you could see how that carries over into the other things. Um, and so
Yeah.
that's another reason why that we got into health and wellness, is because we kind of want to give back to that community that we were in, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
that's interesting. Yeah. So they kind of like, um, I don't know if you know much about like some like is this like a Christian denomination?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like a
Mm-hmm.
some ancient Christian thoughts. Like, are you familiar with Gnosticism? I'm a big philosophy buff, so like I can
Okay.
kind of go down this philosophical road. But I didn't plan to go down this road, by the way. So we're going into territory I wasn't expecting. But um, there was this Gnosticism that came into the Christian church that kind of separated um, like the physical and the spiritual
Yeah.
in a way
Mm-hmm.
that historical Christianity did not. But it was like, hey, what I do in the body, it really doesn't matter as long as, spiritually I'm right. And they created this dualism or dichotomy between the two. And um but it wasn't really like true to like actual Christian teaching. Like what you do in the body was actually really important. They didn't separate spiritual, mental, and physical as much, but there was that Gnostic teaching that kind of came in. But I do find even
Mm-hmm.
in some Christian circles, this push for a separation between the two, like a hyper focus on like spirituality to the neglect of their body, and actually
Yes. Yeah.
having this holistic approach that like, man, what you do with your body can, we see this in the scientific literature, it can
Mm-hmm.
hugely affect your mental state. And
100%. Yeah.
of course, science may have a little bit of hard time distinguishing like mental, spiritual, like, it might go past the tools of scientific inquiry, but um, I do think that's interesting. So does that play the whole like mind, spirit, body play into the holistic approach that you guys take generally in your coaching? I'm assuming it probably is dictated a little bit by the clientele that comes in, like where they're coming from. But like you
Yeah.
said on your website, we try to help you reach health and fitness goals in a holistic, sustainable way. Like, what does that look like? Maybe distinguish it between what would not be holistic in your mind.
Okay. Yeah. So the two key words there would be holistic and sustainable. So to us, holistic wellness is very much viewing everything as one cohesive unit, kind of what we just mentioned here. Um, a practical example would be, for say, nutrition. A lot of people will only focus on macro quantity, or either macronutrients, excuse me, and then totally forget about micronutrients and other things, and the actual quality of what they're eating. So we try to educate people first on quality, then we focused on quantity and macronutrients.
Ooh, I
Um,
like that. That's interesting.
so we start there first. Uh, on the training side of things, um, I try to do everything from an educational standpoint to make it sustainable. Um, nutrition as well, but we basically view ourselves as people's training wheels. And as we distribute information to them or show them exercises or what have you, we're teaching them along the way and giving them the tools and knowledge necessary to do this on their own. Um, Now, that being said, a lot of people like to stick around for longer than that, no longer than their contract, and we love that. But at the end of the day, our mantra is kind of we're trying to work ourselves out of a job. So
Nice.
that's
Yeah. Yeah. Given
yeah.
the education they need to sustain it. Yeah. I really like that. So to dive more specifically into the training itself, the strength
Mhm.
training, um, I want to get into like a little bit of your philosophy of training itself. And like the first thing, do you follow like a linear progression for strength, or what's like there? I know there's several different kind of non-linear approaches. Like
Mhm.
maybe you can dive into that, and um, what is the kind of, maybe you do something different for, I do a linear approach for beginners, but then I begin to change it up a little bit later to a non-linear approach for somebody that's more advanced. How would you think about that when it comes to your approach?
Yeah, I think all of those approaches are great. I feel like, well, let me back up. For me personally, when I first started lifting, it was very much linear progression. So I did starting strength. If you're not familiar, if listeners are not familiar, it's a very basic lifting program that a lot of people are familiar with. That's usually where people start.
Mhm.
And strong lifts 5 by 5 is another example, where basically you do 5 sets of 5 on a particular exercise. And the next time you try that exercise, you try to add 5 pounds and then do another 5 sets of 5. And that does work up to a point. You will plateau and you will have to divvy off and figure out something that works. Um, I feel like for my clients, 90% of them do well with a linear approach. And that's how I train probably 95% of my clients, unless there's some sort of athlete and they're training for something specific, be it a strength sport or what have you. Then we can look into something more advanced, like an undulating or periodized program.
Undulating was the word I was trying to gather, but I was going with non-linear. I
Oh
was just
yeah,
like, what's
same
the
thing.
term I'm trying to come up with? But yeah, the undulating approach. Um, and that kind of, and you can give more specificity to this. So just for those who are listening, this seems to be more of an approach where you're adding kind of like, here's max effort days, here's technique or dynamic training days, and like so there's a little bit more variation in intensity and
Hmm.
load. um, and I know there's variations of like how you would approach that, but is that
Hmm.
something that you would do for someone that was more advanced?
Yeah, yeah, it totally is. So to give you an example, the two programs that I run myself, um, the first one is kind of a power building program. So it's a cross between powerlifting, maximal strength work, and then a hybrid of a hypertrophy program, like a traditional bodybuilding program. That program that I run is a periodization program. So the first 6 weeks of this program is all hypertrophy, lots of high volume. The intensity is a little bit lower, and it's just about honestly growing the actual cross sectional size of your muscle to get bigger. Um, the following 6 weeks, the intensity increases by a lot, and the volume drops off. So now the intention is more working on uh, top end strength, so to speak. So using
Okay.
all that muscle that you've built, and then honing it down and refining it and demonstrating the strength.
When you talk about intensity, so some
Hmm.
will distinguish between like for strength training, strength training, they talk about the intensity of load, but for hypertrophy, intensity is more like the intensity of effort. So like approximation to failure.
Correct.
Do you make that distinguishing when so when you talk about like it's getting more intense, that next six, is that more intensity of load, effort, both? How would you talk about that?
Hmm. Intensity for me is simply how close you are to your one rep maximum. So, for example, in that first 6 week block, I generally stay somewhere around 80, 85% of my one rep maximum, maybe a little bit less, into the 70% range. Now, on the higher intensity block, that goes all the way up to 90, 95, close to 100% when it reaches the end there, when I'm trying to retest my one repetition maximum. Um, so for me, it's really by the actual weight on the bar um, as far as intensity.
Do you go off of like RPE for rating where the effort that you're putting out for strength typically?
I do typically for a lot of my clients, I go by a RPE or RIR principle, rest or
Okay.
reps in reserve principle, either one. I prefer reps in reserve, to be
Oh,
honest, and
okay.
there's no reason for that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I'll ask my clients, hey, do this set and then go until you have one rep left. The reason I say that is in my experience, to gain muscle, you need to be near failure or to failure. I have found that going all the way to failure all the time kind of hinders your recovery, um, especially if you're a natural athlete. Now, getting close to muscle failure, one repetition away, has always been enough for me, and that's what the literature is saying too. You don't necessarily need to go to muscle failure as long as you're in really close proximity to it. So I like to use the 1 to 2 reps in reserve principle when training with clients.
Do you find like RPE
Um,
is kind of confusing for new beginners? Like reps in reserve,
yeah,
it's like a little bit more like, it's pretty self-evident. Like you got two reps left. Pretty simple. Like
right.
rate of perceived exhaustion 9. It's like
Yeah,
what do you mean? And I mean I think that they both can be explained and you can pick them
for
up. But
sure. Yeah.
I typically my training is a little bit more not strictly strength. It's kind of more like hypertrophy training with elements of strength training there.
Hmm.
Um, but I have trained some people just in purely strength like training, or maybe
Hmm.
even like hints of hypertrophy, or if there's some lagging spots, kind of similar to what you do. But when I'm doing hypertrophy training, I use RIR
Hmm.
typically, and when I do strength training, I use RPE. I don't
Okay.
know
Yeah.
why I do it that way necessarily. I just kind of it helps me distinguish between like which modality that I'm biasing.
Hmm.
But I think
Gotcha.
you could probably use either one. I was just curious if you used RPE.
Yeah, and in my strength specific blocks for myself, I like to use percentages, like actual hard data numbers, um,
Off
versus
of your
using
one
it
rep max.
off of your 1 rep max, versus using RPE or RIR, um, because in my mind, there might be a day where I just don't feel like lifting a heavy weight, but my program says I have to lift this specific weight. It's 80% of my 1 rep max. I need to do X amount of sets, X amount of reps. Um, for me, using percentages helps keep me on track, because there would be a lot of times where if I was going by my perceived exertion, I may not go as heavy as I need to be, if that makes sense. That's just me personally. I
So
do really well with numbers.
yeah. So this is really good. This is probably helpful to some people because they're like, I want to get strong, crazy strong. And they're like
Hmm.
maxing out every single week,
Hmm.
or close to every single week. Would you recommend in this progression, like if you're doing linear, and you can correct my nuance here if you do it differently here, but like say like week 1 is 70% of your 1 rep max, probably there's some type of, testing involved to kind of get you close to what
Hmm.
your 1 rep max is. But once you kind of figure that out, week 1, 70, maybe week 2, 75%, week 3, 80,
Hmm.
85, and maybe week 6, you're hitting into 95, and then maybe you go to a peak week where you train. Is
Yes.
that how you kind of guide it? If it's a
Hmm.
strength training idea, do you do that kind of linear percentage wise? Is that how you climb?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as that 6 week block is concerned, it's very linear up until that day. Um, Now that's that one particular program. I mentioned I do two. The other program that I run is basically all strength based. That is a daily undulating program. Um, for listeners that are not familiar, undulating just simply means you're attacking a different, not modality, but you're attacking each exercise with a specific intent, and usually it's split up into three different things: strength, hypertrophy, and then speed. Um, so on the daily undulating program that I run, that allows me to do full body days each session. Um, Practical example is this one that I do run has me bench pressing almost every single day of the week. Now, that sounds crazy, but when you use the undulating principle and every session has a different intent, it's very manageable actually at the end of the day. So you might have one super heavy day, heavy bench press day at the beginning of the week. The next time you do it, it's the intention is speed. So the intensity, the weight is much lighter, and you're trying to focus on speed and
Mhm.
technique. The next session might be hypertrophy based, and so on and so forth. So you're always doing something different. The intent is different. Um,
So let me dig here a little bit. So it sounds like max effort, and then it's like that dynamic lift or technique or speed.
mm,
And then there's the hypertrophy. What looks different between hypertrophy and like max effort? Is it strictly like the amount of reps that you're doing, like rep range changing? Do you actually change your
Mhm.
technique and how you bench? Or no? How does that work?
No, technique is all the same. It looks the same. The only thing that changes is your honestly your intensity level, how close you are to your 1 rep max, and the volume. Volume being how many reps you're doing across all your sets. So if I were to be working on strength primarily, I may do, let's say, 3 to 4 sets of anywhere from 3 to 6 repetitions. Um, Now, going back to what we just talked about, you could say I would do that at a 1 IRR. So every set, I'm leaving 1 rep in the tank. If if you're using a weight that's heavy enough to get you to 1 IRR within 3 to 6 reps, that's a super heavy weight. That's going to be
Yeah.
primarily engaging your brain and telling your brain how to move your muscles better in order to push this weight. That's what helps you get stronger usually. Um, on a hypertrophy day, the actual movement stays the same, but now the intensity goes down, so it's a little bit less weight, um, and the reps and sets will change. So now instead of doing 3 to 4 sets of 3 to 6 reps, it might be um, 3 to 6 sets of, let's say, 8 to 12 reps, something like that. Um, and that's really the only difference. And with speed, it even goes a little bit lighter. You can take your weight down all the way to 50 to 60% of your 1 rep maximum, and then just concentrate on good form, good technique, just greasing the groove, and trying to move that weight as quickly as possible, I find helps.
Do you push more towards muscular failure in hypertrophy, or you still kind of keep it at that 1 RIR and then occasionally hit into that failure as you progress?
Mm-hmm. So I try to keep it into that 1 IRR range all the time. Occasionally, if I feel good on the very last set, I will push it all the way to failure. So until I literally can't push it anymore. Um, I also too feel like it depends on what exercise you're doing. If you're doing a compound lift, like let's say a bench press, uh, if you don't have a spotter, you're not going to want to go all the way to
Yes.
muscle failure, of course, or even really a squat or a deadlift. If you go if you take a compound lift like that, where you're hitting lots of muscles all at the same time, and you go all the way to muscle failure, to me that's super systemically fatiguing, and I don't really want to do that. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'll use the IR principle.
Yeah, I like
Now,
that.
if you're yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say that like the stimulus to fatigue ratio is like it doesn't quite make sense. Like I can get the same amount of growth from being like one rep in a reserve or even
Mhm.
like 0 reps as opposed to failure. Um, then like oh man, if I can see that same amount of growth, but the fatigue is much lower, then
Mhm.
I can consistently build upon this for weeks on end and take it up to a peak week. Like when somebody trains like all out crazy back early 2000s beast mode, bro, everything was
Yeah.
like crazy. Like people
Uh,
plateau much sooner, accumulate so
yep.
much fatigue. Usually, you're probably going to injure yourself for
Mhm.
most people. um I like that, and I try to run towards a peak week. I am for even for hypertrophy, I'll am pushing more to like, okay, we want to push to failure. We kind of want to get close to overextending because we're going to go into a deload. Now, I don't know if you make use of deload
Mhm.
weeks. Probably strength athletes, most definitely, you would have like
Mhm.
deloads and resets. Any details on how you run that, or does that auto, or do you base that more on like an auto regulation idea, like based on the
Mhm.
athlete where they're at, perceived fatigue and exhaustion? What would you do there with deloads? Do you,
Yeah.
in other words, let me clarify, I'm being too vague. Do you have it set like at the end of 12 weeks after these 2 mesocycles or whatever, we're going to do a deload? Or is it more like we're going to see where you're at?
Yeah. Um, yeah. With my training personally, I have programmed deload weeks in, um, usually around every 4 to 6 weeks. That's about how long it takes me uh, to need a deload week, honestly. With clients, it's more auto regulation. So going back to 90% of my clients are linear progression.
Hmm.
It's not really periodized. And I'm with them generally most of the time. I can see that they're either accumulating fatigue or they're not feeling quite as well. When that happens a few sessions in a row, I'll generally know, okay, it's time to probably put this particular person on a deload week and explain to them why that we're doing this. And
Mm.
that's to, hey, your body, we've been training really hard for 8 weeks. I noticed you're not feeling that great in your sessions. It's been hard for you to progress lately. So why don't we take the next week? We're going to reduce your volume in half, try to keep the intensity rather the same, and let your body catch up. That way, when we come back in that following week, you're fresh and renewed, that type of thing. Now, that being said, a lot of people do deload weeks automatically because people take vacations,
Oh
people
yeah,
get
yeah.
sick or whatever. So then, there's a lot of times where we don't even have to intentionally do a deload. They just come naturally. A lot of my clients work and they have to travel for work and those types of things. So I do both auto-regulation and program deloads. Uh, the couple athletes I do train, they do have program deloads. Mhm.
So tell me about like I know there's like a lot of discussion in the literature of like what's the ultimate volume for different modalities or like whether it's hypertrophy or strength. What would you recommend for somebody who's like starting out like volume wise? Like what would be a good amount like man you want to hit, you know, 5 to 12 sets a week per what like how would you break that down?
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple of ways to break that down. Um, for someone just getting started and they literally haven't lifted at all, they're an untrained individual. I typically recommend at least 2 sessions a week, 2 full body sessions a week. Or you could do 1 upper body session, 1 lower body session. Ideally, it would be a full body session both times. Um, for most people, I feel like that's adequate. That's enough to get you started. That's enough to start building some muscle, and it gives you plenty of rest time to recover in between your sessions. Um, Now, if people have the time and their schedule permits, I really like the push pull legs routine. Um, Doing a good, but the way I split that up, I usually do a pull day in the beginning instead of a push. So I do pull first, then a push day, and then a legs day. The reason for that is most people, when they do their push pull leg split, they typically put the back squat and the deadlift both on leg day. Um, I like to separate those two because they're both systemically super fatiguing. So I will split and put the pull day beginning of the week and put their deadlift in that pull day.
Yeah, smart.
Have them do the push day, and then when it comes to leg day, it's again the main movement pattern is the squat. So we do the squat followed by whatever accessories after that. Um, I feel like the pull push leg split is pretty optimal for your average person that works a regular job. They don't have time to be in the gym all the time. Um, Now, if someone wanted more than that, you could absolutely do a fourth day or fifth day, or even do your push pull leg split twice in the same week with a rest day in between. I have
Mm.
seen people do that before if you want that extra volume. But I would say if someone getting started, 2 good full body sessions a week is plenty. And I believe the recent literature kind of points to being 5 to 10 sets per week, honestly, is really all that you need to make decent progress in the gym. Uh,
Is there
Minimum effective dose.
any upper limit that you think or and I know again, I know the literature's kind of divided on some of the upper limit type stuff.
Yeah.
It also depends if you're talking about strength or hypertrophy, but like in your experience, what would you say like you would say that this is probably don't really need to do anymore. Like there's a part of like diminishing returns
Hmm.
after a while. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that kind of plays into rep ranges too. Um, you know, there are some people that do sets of 20, sets of 30, sets of more than that. Um, Typically, I like to stick around the 8 to 12, the 10 to 15, the 15 to 20 range. Any more than 20 reps in one particular set, I find to be you're getting into diminishing returns there. As far as volume across the entire week, I feel like any more than honestly 20 sets is you're probably getting into diminishing returns territory.
Yeah.
Um, I mean
Man,
that's
doing 30 reps for an exercise, it's hard to tell if you're really like 2 reps in reserve. Like
yeah,
it's just so painful. Like I don't think
yeah.
people realize how hard it is to do like really high rep training and actually get into the window where you're going to see as much stimulus as something that would be more like 5 to 20 in there.
Yeah.
That's just my
Mhm.
opinion, just based off of years of experience and maybe even with my own self. Um, I don't know. Maybe I just hate life too if I try to do, especially if you're doing something with the legs. Can you imagine like
Oh, yeah.
squatting 30 repetitions or leg pressing? I've done it occasionally, just kind of
Mhm.
testing different rep ranges, but yeah, I don't. It's not definitely not my favorite. I actually am inclined to be like close to where you're at on that, the rep ranges
Yeah.
there. Um, there was a question I was going to ask about volume. Like, okay, so like real quick about frequency. So obviously, like with by the way, the push or the pull push legs,
Mhm.
you should build. You already have this built out. You should like market that program, bro. Get that out there because
Yeah.
I don't know if I've heard anybody quite do that kind of split, but I think it's
Mhm.
brilliant because um, the axial fatigue that occurs from doing deadlifts and then axial fatigue that occurs from doing like squats. It's just a lot. So
Super.
keeping those separate is really good. I
Mhm.
when I started off, I did the 5x5 program, but I would do
Mhm.
bench 5x5, squat 5x5, deadlift 5x5 all one day. And I actually think I would even include like like just a shoulder press 5x5 type of thing. And then
Yeah.
maybe no, I think later I started adding arms, and then it was like it was probably too much for that day. But I did find that, man, the time I got to whatever the third exercise was, 5 by
Oh,
5,
you're toast.
like, yeah, fake it till you make it, like, pretty
Yeah.
much. I was like, this is not good. So I figured I was like, okay, I need to actually separate these. Then I stumbled upon, um, you might know this person's name. Do you know who Mike O'Hearn is?
Yeah.
Power
Yes.
bodybuilding guy.
Uh-huh.
I know there's a lot
Yep.
of controversy over him. There's like
Yes.
natty or not type stuff. The guy's jacked and like,
Yeah, he is.
strong. He's not like the most strongest power lifter ever, but for a bodybuilder guy, he was pretty impressive with his numbers and lifts and
Yeah. His
uh,
physique's great.
yeah, he's huge. And I think he's getting like in mid 50s, upper 50s, and
Uh-huh.
he
I
still
believe so.
has a pretty incredible, like, physique. Anyways, I remember watching his videos a while back. It's like, I'm gonna do this, and I did power bodybuilding for years, and
Mhm.
I really but he would do, um, like, one of the major lifts per day. It was kind of like your pull push legs in a sense, but it was like he had a back day, and it started with deadlifts, and then
Mhm.
he's like, "Do deadlifts," and then I would follow it with some, accessory work for back, like a pull down and some type of, like, row movement. Then it was, like, bench day, um, and then he would follow it with, like, incline and then a fly, like, to fall off that, and then it was, like, um, leg day was, like, squats, and then he would do leg press and then, like, a leg extension or something like
Mhm.
that. I'm not sure what he actually did for, like, calves or whatever, so this is a kind of just a cursory overview of what I remember, but, uh, have you ever followed any of his programming or anything like that?
I haven't, honestly.
Yeah.
The only thing I know about him is, all the memes that are being shared on social media now with him at the forefront
No, I
as,
know,
like,
and there's
this
like that
this alpha male type guy.
and there's that, like, "Baby Don't Hurt Me" song,
Yeah.
for all of his social media, it's like, alright, wow. Um, yeah, I used him, like, years ago, and then, like, the more I just study the science behind working out, like, I just
Mhm.
realized, like, oh, I think there's better approaches. This got me, down the road, like,
Mhm.
and definitely helped, but I think there's probably a more scientific backing. Of course, he wasn't into the scientific literature as much as just being years in the gym, what he's seen, and which is great too. But, to segue back to the strength training thing, what do you feel like has most helped you hone your skill in strength training? Is there, like, fundamental things you're like, "Man, this really helped hone my ability to
Mm.
advance in strength?"
Yeah, I would say, probably the best thing that helped me was filming myself
Oh,
and then reviewing that back
yeah.
or sending it to other people that I knew that were better than me or more experienced than me, or simply just finding someone in the gym that I could tell was more experienced than me or stronger than me. And hey, can you give me any pointers on my squat or my bench or my what have you? Um, Basically, just I was looking for coaching along the way. That honestly helped me a ton. So going back, not to mention YouTube again, but with me filming myself, I could film myself at the same angles as some of my favorite YouTube personalities, gym personalities, and I would compare my form to theirs and see what I could change. Um, Looking back, that's probably not the best way to have done that because your form, especially on like something like a squat or deadlift, might not look exactly like someone else's because your anatomy is different. But it got me pretty close, and it kept me injury free. So I feel like that's the best thing that I did for myself.
I like that. That's really helpful. Um, who has been like, who's helped you the most, like when it comes to like somebody that you look up to in the strength training world that's been really influential to you?
Mm, influential. So Alan Thrall, have you heard of him?
I have. Yeah. Yeah.
Alan Thrall, I watched a lot of his videos back in the early YouTube days when he first got started. Um, Learned most of my original technique and strength pointers from him. In the videos he would make in the gym that he opened in California, uh, some little warehouse gym. He was just putting these free videos out for people. Um, Watching him and other power lifters around that time, which I don't have anyone's name in particular, but in general, the sport of powerlifting has been super inspiring to me.
Mm,
Watching other people around my same age, around my same weight, and they are considerably stronger than I am. Even people, smaller than me that weigh less than me could outlift me 2, 3, 4 times what I could do.
I
I
know
said,
it's
man,
sick,
that
man.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really cool. Um, that honestly is what got me started. Part of what got me started lifting weights in general, other than my pain, was seeing other people that could do these awesome things. And I said, man, the human body is capable of this. I want to do it. So,
Yeah. It's so cool. Like, yeah, I've seen some guys who are just like 165 and they're just like crushing numbers like way higher. It's like, what in the
yeah.
world? The technique and like it comes back to like obviously your muscles are getting stronger, neurologically stronger, but there's a skill involved.
Hmm.
Strength is a skill, and
Sure.
developing that is awesome. What would be some like mistakes you see lifters make when trying to build strength?
Okay. Mistakes. Honestly, the biggest one is going to be nutrition. I feel like I know that's not really a training thing, but man, I see people. You really don't need an advanced program to make progress in the gym. As long as you pick one and you stick with it and you're consistent with it, you will probably make gains if you're eating to support that.
But
Um,
Coach Ryan, I'm bored. I want variety. Can I stand on a
yeah,
Buso ball and do something? What do you say?
you can, but you're not going to get much done. You need the best programs are underwhelming on paper.
Mm.
Honestly, they're going to be monotonous. They're going to be the same things over and over again. Trying to do a little bit more each time.
But
That's
what
all
if
it
I want to
takes.
try to do more at once and just like get things knocked out? So I'm going to do squats on a Buso ball while doing bicep curls. And then I might actually turn
Mhm.
that into a shoulder press when I get to the top. So I'm doing shoulders, biceps, legs, and if an earthquake comes, I'm prepared because I'm getting that balance. What do you think?
Yeah,
Is this a good approach, Ryan?
I would say that is a horrible approach. There's a quote that I love, and excuse my language here. You might edit this out, but there's a quote that says, "You can't half-ass two things. You have to whole-ass one thing at a time." And
Yes.
so when you're distributing your mental load, your mental bandwidth, so to speak, across multiple things, you're not going to be you're not going to be doing anything really other than burning calories.
Mm.
So
Say it louder for those in the back.
yeah,
Seriously, this is good advice for so many other areas.
yeah,
Business owner, you could
for
be
sure.
like divided into like, "Ooh, this sounds cool. I'm going to chase this over here." And you're never successful because you're divided.
Yeah.
You lack the focus and being able to do like a few things well and consistently well will lead to success, whether it's lifting or just
Mhm.
life in general. I think that's really good advice. You brought up nutrition. So I just want to jump into this real quick. What's a good breakdown for like macronutrients generally? Do you have like a breakdown of like even like percentage wise? Like for protein, do you try to get a gram of protein per pound of body mass, lean body mass? And then what, like obviously carbohydrates are big for performance. Do you have a breakdown for those things?
hmm Yeah, in the past, basically every gym bro will say 1 gram of protein, or yeah, 1 gram of protein per pound that you weigh. Um, that's general okay advice in my opinion. We typically recommend people a 40, a 30-30 split. Um, for
40,
most
30,
people,
30.
40% being 40% carbs, 30% protein, 30% fat is generally as balanced of a macro split as you can get. Now, you may want to manipulate that depending on whether you're male or female. Typically, women require a little bit more fat distribution than men do. Or if you're, let's say, an endurance athlete or a high performance strength athlete, you may want to bump your carbs up 5% or maybe even 10% all the way up to 50, and reduce your fat content down. There's ways to manipulate that 40-30-30, but in general, that's kind of the ballpark where we try to get everyone at.
Would you say that somebody's like trying to do strength training? Let's say they're trying to compete in it and but they also want to do like the ketogenic diet. Would you say like, I mean, I'm sure you probably could accommodate to some level, but would you say like, I think this is probably going to hinder some progress there just because of the lack of
hmm
carbohydrates? What's your thoughts there?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I personally never really recommend a keto diet. Now, I'm not saying not to do it because it certainly is a tool that can be used in a short term to realize some effects.
Mhm.
But it's not one of those things that's really long term sustainable, in my opinion. Especially if you're an athlete and you're wanting to perform and do well in a strength sport, or especially an endurance sport that requires lots of carbohydrates. Um, yeah, you just won't perform well. So I never recommend it, honestly. Of course, we can accommodate it if someone really wants to do it, but
Right, 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 right. Um, so you said 40, 30, 30. Just want to make sure I have this right. 40 you
mhm,
said was carbohydrates, 30 proteins, 30 fats, and that might adjust a little bit based on gender, maybe
mhm,
based a little bit on like performance level. Like I think you said maybe carbs moving up a bit, in certain things. Women might want some more dietary fat there.
mhm.
That makes sense. Um, so what advice would you give to someone who wants to like compete in the strength training sport? I think to give context, you're getting ready, you're preparing for another competition. Is that correct?
Yes,
And is this your
yeah.
second? Did you say your second competition?
This will be my third.
This is your
Yeah.
third. Okay, so you've
hmm
done two so far, and you're
hmm
getting ready to do three. So you know you've got some you got some reps in literally
Yeah.
for doing these competitions. Somebody's like,
uh
man, I think I want to try to start out towards this. What would be your recommendation there?
My recommendation would be find a coach.
Find a coach.
If you can, if it's accessible to you, a coach is invaluable. Um, Now, I'm not saying hire me, but hire anyone that knows what they're talking about, that can watch you and correct your technical mistakes, because you don't want to get hurt. And going back to, I think we mentioned this before, but um, heavy lifting necessarily won't get you hurt, but bad technique can. Um, Especially in something like powerlifting or uh, definitely Olympic lifting. If you're wanting to do Olympic lifting, that is the technicality of that sport is incredible, and it takes people literally their entire lifetime to master those lifts. So you need to find a coach or someone that's willing to give you some advice, someone else in the gym. Um, so I would say find someone experienced and then pick their brain, ask them to watch you, even film yourself, send them videos for feedback. You need to be seeking out coaching in some form, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Whether it's just like finding the person or actually just saying, "Hey, I'm going to bite the bullet." I find in anything in life, like I look at coaching as like the fast pass. You ever go to a theme park? You get like the fast pass to the roller coaster. No
Yeah.
staying in line, you just jump ahead.
uh-huh.
I think coaching is that way because you're leaning on not only their knowledge base, but the experience they've had with clients over and over and over again, getting good
Yeah,
success in this area.
absolutely.
Um, sure, I think it was Alex Hormozy said in anything you can take, you have time or money, but he just said, but just remember that time you'll never be able to replenish. You'll never get that back, but you could probably always replenish, well, at least most likely replenish the money, the investment.
Hmm.
And I think that's a good thought. And sure, like, hey, do I want to advance in this area of my life? I probably need to find a coach. And I've
Yeah.
been trying to do that in my life, just generally, not just in health and fitness, but like in business, even particular aspects of business. Like, man, I suck in this area. Who's doing this well? I
Hmm.
read a
Yeah.
book recently too. It's called Who Not How. And
Yeah.
of course, you've demonstrated several times through this episode where you didn't know how to do something and you looked up a YouTube video and you kind of learned yourself through seeing from other people. But in a sense, there was a who there as well, because you're finding someone on a channel that's already doing it well, and you're just kind of mimicking. You're seeing this person who's an exemplar of this particular thing, and you're following that. But I'm starting to, instead of saying, "Hey, I'll just figure it out on my own," I'm always asking, "Who's already doing this at a high level that I can,
Yeah.
I could borrow their experience and get to the next level." I think that's fantastic. I got like two more questions for you, and we'll try to wrap this up here.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
What do you think about the West Side barbell? Like, I was thinking, oh man, we almost didn't talk about West Side, just because
Uh-huh.
if you've been in any strength training stuff, you probably come across West Side a little bit. For those who are probably new to this topic, you're like, West Side, what? What are you talking about? But the diving into like the conjugate method and stuff like that, I don't know if you're up on that literature or not, but to what level have you profited? Where would you distinguish yourself from that type of approach?
Um, to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about the conjugate method. I know some things of it and some things of Westside and how controversial they are. Uh, no, I don't follow the conjugate program. As far as I understand, it's primarily powerlifting based or strength based, but they use a lot of crazy techniques like using chains and bands and different types of variations of
Yeah.
lifts. And there's always some new technique that they're trying to do, and lots of steroids.
And
So
lots of steroids.
um, that's yeah. Honestly, I don't know much about them. I know they are huge and they were um, highly influential in the strength sports scene, powerlifting scene especially. Um, but I haven't really.
So I'm going to throw a rock, not at you, but just at the approach a little bit. I'm just curious what you think. Throw a rock at the enemy type of thing.
Okay.
They're not really the enemy. I'm just being
Yeah.
facetious. But I always felt like it's like overcomplicating the process with just doing so many different styles. Like, we're going to do a kind of box squat here, a front squat here, a squat with bands and kettlebells. Have you ever seen those where
Yeah.
it's like
Hmm.
bouncing around? Let me just pause on that exercise. What do you think? Is there a utility to something like that? I have personally never trained with a mesocycle with anything that's like, I think I've tried like the whole like bench press with chains before, like when it's
Hmm.
at the bottom, it's heavier. I'm sorry, reverse that. At the bottom, it's lighter.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the top, the chains are coming off the floor, so it gets heavier.
Hmm.
I've maybe seen some help from that. I'm not sure, but that was like a long time ago when I was just like investigating a lot of things. I just find, generally speaking, I'd rather someone just have a normal progression. And I like to strip away, it's kind of the principle of specificity. Like, what are you trying to
Yes.
improve?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to improve the bench press, squat, and deadlift. Okay, great. Now, if they're a power lifter, for what? Competitions. Okay. Do you use chains at competition? Do they have any of this type of thing no? Okay, well, probably just actually doing the thing over. And maybe you do it with different kind of like technique days and dynamic lifting days. That can be
Hmm.
helpful, but it's still the thing as opposed to all of these
Yeah.
tertiary things. Now, I'm not at some of these guys, like they devote their whole life to this idea of strength. Most of my coaching has been more in the general public.
Hmm.
Um, But to me, it makes more sense to make it more simple. I feel like you probably would progress better. But all this other stuff makes it look more interesting. It actually makes it look more scientific because you're like, oh, we're utilizing, just throw whatever big words you want to throw in with the
Hmm.
lift, and it just
Yeah.
sounds elaborate. What do you think? Give me pushback if you disagree.
No, I actually 100% agree with you. Um, I feel like there is a time and place for variations. Let's say you want to compete in powerlifting or what have you, and you need to, or you have a weak point, let's say in your bench press. Your weak point is a couple inches off of your chest. Okay, I would probably recommend you do a pin press. So set up safety bars to your sticking point and then start from there.
Mm-hmm.
In those cases where you have a specific weakness, it's okay to do variations of those lifts. Um, but I think honestly, what you said is true. Where a lot of their method looks really cool. It looks really cool to someone that doesn't lift a lot, or even people that do go to the gym. They're like, oh man, these guys are using bands and they're jumping around and they're using chains. It just looks like caveman, like jailhouse strong kind of stuff. And I will give them that. It does look cool, but I would just say if rather than using chains, for example, just lower the weight and get more volume in. Be more specific with your training. Um, so yeah, 100% agree with you. In my opinion, it's really not necessary to do all that stuff um, unless you just really want to. And if you want to do it, go for it.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things I go to too. Is like if this is something that you enjoy that can be sustainable, just getting people
Yeah,
moving. Hey, if you're moving
yeah,
again, like man, I'm celebrating that. Could we do
absolutely.
better? Can we actually um, have something that's more based on science and progression and so forth? Sure, but I'm just happy that you're moving again. I'm sure as a coach, you're just
Hmm.
like in the same vein, but then trying to manage towards how can we actually see better results with what's backed by the science. I think that's good. Ryan, man, this has been a joy. I really appreciated you coming on. I think this is going to be hugely beneficial. Um, I did want to add one other question. We'll close. When it comes to the squat, I have some clients that are like, "Hey, can you break down like technique for the squat, like from beginning to end, how to like brace yourself when you're going
Hmm.
down?" A lot of people like you want to be tight, when you're going in. Maybe you would articulate this differently. Um, but from like stance all the way through like execution, like how would you describe that to a client? This will be our last question, and we'll close with this.
Okay. All right. From start to finish with the back squat, I teach it all the way from setting up the bar. So setting up the bar on the squat rack needs to be at a certain height. I always begin there because a lot of people get that wrong. I've seen. So when you are wanting to do a back squat, set up your barbell on the squat rack so that when you walk right up to the bar and touch your chest to the bar, it should be about your armpit level height. That gives you enough clearance to be able to unrack the bar without having to come up on your toes. A lot of people get tripped up on that. So start there first, lower the bar to your armpit height. Um, when you unrack the bar, whether you're doing high bar or low bar squats, um, doesn't matter. And for people that are listening that are unfamiliar, a high bar back squat typically just means that the barbell is resting on your upper shoulders, your traps. And then with a low bar squat, the barbell is resting on your rear delts. So back here, there's a shelf that's created, and the bar is sitting back there. Typically, a lot of power lifters use the low bar squat because number one, it decreases the range of motion ever so slightly, but it allows you to typically squat heavier weights because of where the weight is on your back. It biases most of those posterior chain muscles that are larger than your leg muscles, your quads. So things like your glutes, hamstrings, and back really come into play. Let you lift heavier. Um, when you unrack the bar, you only need to take one step out of the rack. You don't need to walk 3 to 4 to 5 steps out of the rack. One step behind you is good enough. One step to the side, and then you're good. Look down at your feet. Make sure your feet are roughly shoulder width apart. Your toes are pointed out ever so slightly. Now, when people say get tight, they're probably referring to trying to brace your core, which is called the Valsalva maneuver. And all that means is that you are taking a breath of air trying to get a diaphragm breath. So if anyone's familiar with singing, singers take that belly breath. They get air down here, and that's how they support their singing. Same type of thing with the back squat. And with this maneuver, you want to get air down below into your belly. Once you have a good breath of air, I tell people to kind of like brace like you're about to get hit in the gut. And that will help get most people's abs tight. You want your entire core to be tight, and that's what they mean. Now, a common misconception with the bracing feature, or bracing, what I'm talking about here, is a lot of people will bear down too hard. They'll squeeze their abs really, 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 really tight. There's no need to do that. You just need to have them engaged. If you squeeze too tightly, you may have issues with incontinence and then also dizziness if you come up out of the squat. So don't bear down. Just slightly engage your core, and your core is your front abdominal muscles, your side abdominal muscles, all of that. So I like to tell people, imagine a can of soda that hasn't been cracked yet. It's a new can of soda. It is super tight and rigid, and a lot of weight can be supported on the top of that can. The moment you crack it and you let the air out, you can flatten that can easily if you put weight on top of it. Same principle applies. So think of a soda can. Get the air, get tight, and then close your mouth and attempt to exhale. When you do that, you're creating a lot of intra-abdominal pressure, and that's what's going to help protect your back and allow you to feel more safe and effective in the squat. The tighter your core is, the less energy leaks you'll have, and the less trouble you'll have coming up out of that squat. So that's kind of a basic,
Yeah, I like that. I
verbal
like the
rundown of the squat.
soda can analogy. That's really helpful. I like
Yeah.
that. Do you do anything like with like feet? People talk about like really kind of almost screwing them into the floor. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's
Yeah.
almost like where they angle their feet out just a skosh, but then they almost push to where they're like their glutes activate more. So it's like the core bracing, but also that screwing into the floor, glute activation. Is that something that you would teach, or you just be like, I think that might get confusing? Because
Mm-hmm.
after a while, when you're like, brace this, brace that, brace that, you're like, what am I doing again? Oh yeah, the squat.
No, you're so right. It's a lot to think about off the bat if I'm saying all of these things to someone. So I honestly, I try to explain it as minimal as possible and watch them do it. And if I see that there's something about to be off, I'll say, okay, pause, think about this cue. So it's a slow release of information, if that makes sense, to not overload someone.
Totally.
So yes, I have heard the screwing in the feet cue before, and I do use that occasionally. Um, I feel like some people overdo that a little bit too much, and they try to push their knees out more than they should
Mm,
because they're afraid of their knees caving in, which is known as knee valgus or knee varus if the knees go outward too much. Um,
right.
People have been taught uh, not to let their knees cave in, but really that's an okay thing to happen as long as it's not excessive. And that just simply means your legs are working, your adductors are turning on, and it's bringing your legs in just a little bit to help you come up out of the squat. Um, that's totally fine. So if I only use that cue if I feel like it's necessary. Um,
Yes. Okay. Okay. That's great. Man,
yeah.
there's a lot here, man. I think if somebody listens to you just walk through things, they would have a good foundation for thoughts on strength training, how to pursue forward. I do think, though, for those listening in, if you are thinking about a coach, I think you should at least reach out to Ryan if you feel inclined to. Do you have like a consultation, like a free consultation, probably something along those lines that you
Mhm.
do? And maybe
Yeah,
tell
absolutely.
me a little bit too of like how somebody could find you and reach out to you.
Yeah. Easiest way to reach out to us is honestly probably through our website. It's wellnessbywilhites.com. You can go there. We have a little button that'll send you straight to our contact page. And then you can set up a free consultation with us, either myself with strength training, or personal training, or Grace with nutrition, or you can work with us both if you'd like. We also have an Instagram account that we're active on, Wellness by Wilhites. Those are the two best ways to get in touch with us. So we'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. We'll put that in the show notes so people can find that easy. Ryan, thanks again for joining us, man. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's awesome.